Hey guys, it's Heather here with Underwater Panther, and I did get my mic situation figured out, my audio, I do believe. I've actually had this mic for quite some time, and I just have never used it, but hopefully you can hear me better. My last video, I think, was pretty good with the audio. Let me know what you think about my audio with this mic. So I am finishing up my Scorpio or ENFP and Libra ENTP series, comparing the two together. I am currently at 93% uploading my video comparing the two between the thinking and feeling realms. Now, Scorpios, I should have gotten my key card out. One moment. Okay, here we go. So I did edit in my key cards here to my video so that you could view them as I was speaking on my last video. So my last video was, I literally pulled out 2 Scorpio key cards. That was silly. Here's the Libra. Okay. Alright, so my last video was comparing the thinking and feeling realms of Libra and Scorpio. Now, Scorpio has extroverted thinking child and introverted feeling parent, and Libras have introverted thinking parent and extroverted feeling child, so they are flip-flopped. And now I'm getting into the introverted sensing inferior. They both have extroverted intuition hero and introverted sensing inferior in common with each other. So they are both the pathfinder types. Libras are the visionary and Scorpios are the advocate. So inferior introverted sensing quotation is, I'm fearful with what I experience. So both of these personality types, they can tend to not feel comfortable in their own skin, and they tend to utilize their social relationships to get things done. So an extroverted intuition is a feminine cognitive function, and that is found in both of their hero functions, and they are both informative in their interaction style, which means that they love to storytell, beat around the bush. They like to hear themselves talk, and they are both extroverted and initiating. So they do have a high social network, and they're both movement oriented in their primary interaction style, which means that they both thrive in chaos and they want to always be doing things. All right, so the inferior cognitive function is a pessimistic function, takes more energy to use, and has a negative slant. This is where our fears and insecurities are and can be very difficult to control. So the inferior cognitive function is a gateway function, and that in an orderly transition that can go into our subconscious, and in a disorderly fashion it can go into our demon cognitive function in our superego or unconscious side of our mind. So the fall astrologically, when a planet falls within a sign, it means those things are asleep and barely conscious within the archetype or personality type. When a planet falls or is asleep, it can have nightmares or beautiful dreams and everything in between. You can really doubt yourself here or do things you never knew you could before because you were afraid to try. A planet in the sign opposite, the sign of its exaltation, is said to be in fall. Therefore, contrary to exaltation, the planet loses its strength and influence. So astrology lines perfectly with psychology. When it comes to breaking up the ego into the four parts astrologically is the ruler, exaltation, left field, and fall. And then psychologically, it's the hero, parent, child, and inferior cognitive functions. So Scorpios have the moon in fall with introverted sensing inferior. And then Libras have the sun in fall with introverted sensing inferior. So I think that's actually pretty interesting. The sun represents our actions. It is considered our ego itself, our identity. And the moon is considered our subconscious realm, our emotional realm, our reactions to things. It's a more feminine energy, this moon compared to the sun. The sun is a very masculine energy. So it's just interesting. All right, so what is the inferior cognitive function within the ego? So we're adding psychology to the astrology. So our inferior cognitive function is most likely projected onto others. We are trying to be aspirational eventually with our inferior function. The cognitive attitude of the inferior is lost, missing, repressed, indulge, avoid, crutch, addictions, fears, insecurities, sensitive, touchy, defensive, protective, desires when bored with ego, magical, mysterious, blissful, childish, naive, extreme, delusional, and can cause neurosis. The inferior function development roughly begins around the age of 35. It's actually kind of hot. I thought it would be cooler because the wind is outrageous, but these candles actually help with heat. So our most painful pressure point within our ego's cognition is the inferior function. It is our nuclear power button where everything can be on fire, where we find our internal and external issues magnified. Our inferior function is the gateway into our demon function or unconscious superego when triggered. But if we can develop the inferior function and not get triggered, we will begin to develop our subconscious, our ultimate happiness, and potential legacy. So it is where our fears and insecurities exist. We tend to cover our insecurities with pride, where we are most vain, where we will find hatred for other people if they are hammering at our inferior, and where we will immediately go to blows. The inferior function is the most sensitive within our ego and therefore needs to be nurtured consistently. It's closest linked to the demon function in our superego, so it can interact in big ways and can cause serious problems if we are not careful. If we cannot manage our problems through our ego, subconscious or unconscious, we tend to burn everything down with our demon function within our superego. So we are at our happiest when this side of our mind is developed, because the inferior is the beginning of our subconscious. In order to gain access, you have to develop your inferior function and turn it into aspirational. If you do not do this, you will endure midlife crisis. Your mind will force development whether you like it or not. So the inferior function is the most painful pressure point we have in our minds. Excuse me. If you hit someone in their insecurities, they may have an immediate angry reaction, aka demon mode. In other words, they will go into their unconscious demon function mode in which they most likely cannot control themselves. Each zodiac archetype or personality type has different triggers due to cognition and development. Get to know your weaknesses here so you can manage your triggers better. Understanding what truly triggers you can allow you to build better boundaries with people and navigate with social grace. If you let others know your triggers and they continue to push them, then it is obviously time to cut the relationship due to its toxicity. The inferior function is very difficult to control. All one can do is bring awareness to it and practice wielding it daily to make it stronger, like building a muscle. Understand what triggers you can allow you to... I already said that. Okay, so if your inferior isn't triggered by another person, it can also come from mental exhaustion due to a variety of reasons, including stress, economic pressures, emotional conflict or turmoil, tough transitional periods of life, dealing with too many challenges, or even general fatigue from living a very busy lifestyle. Because of its relative unconsciousness, the inferior function is responsible for many of our childish, naive, extreme, or delusional thoughts and behaviors. The inferior function is more sensitive and touchy than the other functions in the functional stack. So that is the hero, parent, child, and inferior within the ego. Eventually, I will do books getting more into the subconscious, unconscious, and superego, but I am primarily focused on the ego right now. So individuals who push our buttons have usually discovered a way to offend, irritate, or threaten this function. The sort of childish sensitivity and defensiveness associated with this function is closely related to what are commonly described as ego issues: hypersensitivity, ego defensiveness, excessive pride, or self-righteousness. Despite its ability to distort, exaggerate, or idealize reality, the inferior function is still hard to resist. Because it can be so blissful through strong feelings and infatuation, for example, it can easily become a source of addiction. Like all addictions, it may inspire various obsessive, compulsive, or otherwise unhealthy behaviors. So, when in the grip of the inferior function, we may feel locked into certain moods, attitudes, or behaviors that are not easily escaped. We may also become increasingly narrow-minded, irrational, self-indulgent, and irritable. So like any addiction, what begins with a sense of intense pleasure can eventually turn for the worst. So according to analytical psychology, repression of mental activities to the unconscious mind tends to produce maladaptive tendencies. The longer and more intense the period of repression, the more likely it is that the boundary between unconscious and conscious breaks down. When unconscious pressure remains high due to prolonged and intense repression, it will find some form of release eventually, whether through healthy or unhealthy means. Of the four functions, the inferior is the closest in proximity to the unconscious mind, so it is the easiest function to hijack for releasing unconscious pressures when a person is mentally exhausted. This causes a person to act really out of character for the time period that their mental energy remains exhausted due to the oppositional nature of the inferior function. These out of character episodes, commonly referred to as being in the grip of the inferior function, can vary in their behavioral characteristics depending on individual skillfulness in replenishing mental energy and reviving ego defenses. The inferior function needs to be nurtured consistently in order to avoid inferior grip and tamp down the negative aspects of the inferior. So we can do this by practicing daily self-care through avoiding overuse or overextending the dominant hero function, so that repression of the inferior function also loosens, so the hero and the inferior are on an axis. And we can tend to have a lot of pride in our hero function, and we can tend to go on autopilot within our hero. And the more we repress our inferior function, that's where our weaknesses and insecurities are, the greater repression and build up we will have. Build up and spewing over. To do this, or become more healthy, we need to develop the parent and child functions in order to create a more optimal bridge of awareness of inferior function activity. As self-awareness deepens over time, unconscious activity is given more room to breathe, and there is less and less reason to treat the inferior function like the enemy. We need to maintain adequate mental energy levels by addressing the factors that drain away mental energy. So we need to get enough sleep, eat healthier, maintain healthier habits and environment. Learn and practice effective stress management strategies that allow for regular replenishment of mental energy. So that can be through exercise, meditation, journaling, learning finances, and continuing education. Excuse me. As a child approaches prepubescence, 10 to 12, they tend to overuse the dominant hero function, which in turn exacerbates inferior repression, so the tensions between the dominant hero and inferior functions reaches a critical point. So unless there is some way to relieve the tension, the mind becomes increasingly fragile, unstable, and susceptible to inferior disruption. Parents will often notice their child behaving more erratically during this period if type development stalls, because the tension between the dominant hero and inferior functions is never properly addressed. A person is likely to show more and more serious signs of personality disorder over time. In order to gain proper access to your subconscious, you have to develop your inferior function and in turn turn it into an aspirational one. If you do not do this, you will endure midlife crisis, like I said. So to make your inferior function more aspirational, you have to let go of your insecurities and fears by gaining more experiences outside of your comfort zone with personal development in mind. You will be at your happiest when your subconscious side of your mind is developed. So that is the inferior and the fall. So I explained the astrology and the psychology with what the fall is and in the inferior cognitive function. And now both Libra and Scorpio have introverted sensing, inferior. So what is introverted sensing? Let me get a drink real quick, actually. All right, so introverted sensing feels like a colder earth energy. No fire signs have introverted sensing within their top 4 cognitive functions within their ego. A little side note, introverted sensing, actually I'll just get into it here. So it is an introverted subjective perception to object function, represents past, loyalty, honor, and duty. Passive and involuntary records and collects information. And so this can be, because this is in the inferior, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are, Libras and Scorpios are good at doing introverted sensing things. So I'm going to explain what introverted sensing is, but keep in mind that this does not mean that they are good at these things. That's actually where their weaknesses are. So it says passive and involuntarily records and collects information. And I am aware, highly aware, that Scorpios, more so than Libras, tend to have intrusive thoughts. It's like the replaying over and over and over of experiences, especially bad experiences that they've had in their mind. I don't know if that's my cat making noise. I think that's my cat making noise. Making sure there's no other animals in here. Jeez. Farm life. Okay, so unconsciously and irrationally receives info and comes to conclusions. SI, or introverted sensing, is all about long-term memory. So that means that they have a huge RAM and storage and access to long-term memories. But they can tend to have slow reaction because storing so much info can take a while to retrieve it. All about the past and have high history intelligence, names, dates, and cannot control it. Very aware that history repeats itself. All that has happened before can happen again. So it's the introverted sensing and extroverted intuition axis. They both have that. Carefully observant, graceful, all about their own comfort, sensitive and insecure, but can truly weather storms due to having high endurance. But they are usually not aware of this because of the inferior function. Very loyal and duty-based, has a need for honor, provides personal experience, but they want to receive sensations. So the 5 sensations. So introverted sensing users, they tend to want to receive gifts and back rubs and all the things. They want someone to pamper them normally. wants and needs consistency and accuracy, wants to be rooted and knowledgeable, tends to want to build their Library of Alexandria, so they want all of the information. That's normally why they try to keep themselves in the loop with information, what's going on. So introverted sensing represents reviewing past experiences, what is, focuses on what is in a concrete way, seeking detailed information and links to what is known, recalling stored impressions, accumulating data, recognizing the way things have always been. Introverted sensors are known to be, not necessarily with these personality types, but with high SI users, they tend to want to take the beaten path already. They aren't as initiating and creating new, like pioneering. They're not as pioneering as extroverted sensing. So introverted sensing users, they can tend to want to do the tried and true path. I personally would not say that that's the case with Libra and Scorpio. They are more inventive and creative, and they care about their own comfort zone, but they are the types that will go into a space of people and just blow it up with chaos. They don't care about other people's comfort zones, and they will start arguments or whatever the case may be, demands, whatever. They will go into an area of people and just cause chaos. So it's like they do care about their own comfort, but they're also not afraid to stir the pot. I mean, they are the major pot stirrers. So SI can aid in personal growth and development by recalling to mind lessons learned in the past, acts rather passively in outside conscious control, afraid of new experiences, but needs to get over that fear in order to build up the best future intuition through extroverted intuition, creates more accurate predictions, provides access to our most basic sense of being, apart from thought or outward stimuli. So introverted sensing normally makes us extremely connected with our own body sensations, and this can be why that they are not comfortable in their own skin, because they are hyper aware of what their body is doing, or they can feel like they lack physical energy. It's like this can make a low SI user, they can tend to be like hypochondriacs, but Virgos can do that too. It's definitely a thing. So they can be extremely in tune with their own body sensations. They may seem stubborn and closed-minded, may feel they have limits as far as free choice and what they believe, gets frustrated by mind replaying memories in random fashion or intrusive thoughts, less synthetic and creative than an I, but preserves and repeats information in its original form. So they can both be very good listeners and repeat what was told in an accurate way. Seeks to be consistent, also needs consistency and loyalty, wants to stay true to their words and live according to a sense of history. And they can tend to tell the same story over and over. Alright, so I dove really deep into what introverted sensing is, the inferior, and fall. I don't know how long am I in this. About 25 minutes. Yeah, I think that's all I want to cover on this video specifically. I think I might actually pull up my Libra book really quickly and scroll down to SI inferior. So Libras have the sun in fall. The sun represents actions, how we see ourselves, how we act consciously, or just conscious awareness of ourselves and our own vitality. They can think. Okay, so both of these types, they can tend to wear darker colors because they can't necessarily see themselves. They can be shifty or edgy. They're the types that can tend to sit in the back of the room and people watch and be uncomfortable to initiate in the beginning, actually. Like, they'll save your life in one moment and then steal your car the next day. They're like Gemini. You cannot trust them with your friends, money, and words. They both are chaotic neutrals, that's for sure. They can both tend to self-doubt a lot. They may need to express themselves a lot before taking action. Libras more so than Scorpios. Scorpios are less... Scorpios are extremely strategic, so they're not going to tell you what they're doing before they do it. Libras, on the other hand, they can tend to be overexpressive to a degree to get validation from others. They love to express themselves a lot because they have a lot of energy in the mind, just not physically. They always feel like they're not seen, and they both can feel like they're not seen enough. And this is where the depravity can come into play. Like, they need a lot of attention because they just don't feel like they are seen and appreciated. SI inferior lacks attention, vitality, and energy. People tend to not see them unless they're always talking, or at least that's how they feel. And it can be even worse when they are like the middle child. So they always feel like the middle child, or that they lacked attention and love in their life. Libras, they can really be afraid to try new things, or they can even be afraid of being successful, and this can cause inaction and failure to launch. Aries can be this way too. Aries tend to watch what people do. They're not really sure what they want to do, and so they will tend to watch a lot of people and be like, well, do I want to do that? And then Libras and Scorpios, they just want to take the least amount of steps possible to get it to a goal. So they can tend to sit and watch and wait for a little bit too long. They both need to fail forward, so it's like a long life of trial and error. So fire signs, they don't have SI, and they're they're not high SI users, so it's not within their ego, the fire signs. But the fire signs, they tend to throw themselves into a situation, and they have a lot more courage and less fear. So these two personalities are not high risk takers when it comes to physical things, but when it comes to high risk business decisions, or gambling, or stock markets, or throwing all of themselves into a business idea, both of these are very high risk when it comes to that. They're not high risk physically with their body, mentally, financially, things like that, ideas, their inventions. They are very high risk when it comes to that. So yeah, they both can tend to gather information from a lot of people in order to learn from other people rather than physically going through the challenges themselves. They want to know the steps in order to systematically shorten the steps, so they love biohacking or taking shortcuts. They intellectualize others' actions, so they both can tend to band-aid things or be cheap up front, and that can tend to cost them in the long run. And they both don't have a lot of inspiration within themselves, so that can go into jealousy and envy. Can be a problem. So with all that being said, due to so much lack in themselves with the sun and moon and fall, so lacking the love with Scorpio and lacking the physical vitality in Libra, they can really come across as energy vampires. They need to gain from others through physical and emotional energy because they lack that in themselves. The extroverted archetypes can handle this more than the introverted archetypes. So the introverted personality types will certainly see them as narcissistic, especially in romantic relationships. Both of these personality types can tend to not care about their own health, and that can be a major problem. So they definitely aren't caring about the health of others. They're just wanting to see how much they can get out of somebody, how far they can push people. But in the same breath, they can both have high boundaries. Scorpios more so than Libra. They can have innately or naturally higher boundaries. They already feel like they can't do something, so they're going to try to see what they can get others to do. So the people pleasers, they're not like this and can be taken advantage of here. Which I think I'd rather be on the Scorpio and Libra end of that stick. So they both have SE demon. So their demon mode is an extroverted demon mode. Not all personality types have an extroverted demon mode. So that means when they are in their demon mode, they're just totally taking it out on other people. They can turn into Heath Ledger, the Joker burning the world down. Chaotic evil with no real rhyme or reason. Scorpio and Libra both have SE demon. At the higher levels of this, they want to burn the forest down to start all the way back over with new growth. This is all stemming from their SI inferior depravity. They want to be wanted at all times, that they are needed. They can obligate other people or subjugate other people. And they need a lot of love. So they're always going to want to go to social events, parties, educational things, and charity events and such like that. So that's how they can fill up their depravity, is by being charitable. Alright, I think that's the end of the Libra and Scorpio series. I think my next video is going to be on the 12 personality types. That's probably going to be a very long video. I finally published my 12 personality types astro-psychologically in a nutshell. It's about 109 pages. I'll probably skim through it as a promotional thing in my next video. And then after that, I'm going to dive hardcore into Scorpio, because we already are in Scorpio season. Isn't that wild? Happy birthday to all the Scorpios out there. My dad's birthday is November 2nd, so it's coming up quickly. Anyways, please like and subscribe. I appreciate all of your love and support and your book purchases. Eventually, I want to get merch, like shirts and sweaters and stuff. I want to sell these key cards and other things, so that is in the future. Appreciate your time and take care of yourselves out there. It's witchy season.